So if you've never had an incident command class, this is really going to interest you because it's how the control works in large incidents, even smaller incidents. So it's really going to be a good class, good session to hear if you're not familiar with the incident command system.
Thank you, Russ, and thank you for the invitation. I hate to disagree with my host, but I guarantee there's more people in the state that know more about this than me. But I'm glad to be with you all today and with those of the folks that are going to be watching this live stream. My contact information is here. It'll be at the end of the program. If you have a question or would like to have some conversation with me, I'm happy to have you contact me. This is kind of tongue-in-cheek slide I present at many of the classes I teach. I'm from Champaign, so I drove more than 50 miles. I brought a briefcase with me, so that makes me an expert, right? Wrong. It does not. I'll share with you a little bit about what I know. My background is that I am retired law enforcement. I was with the Champaign County Sheriff's Office for almost 30 years, and I've been with the Fire Service Institute teaching in this program since '08. I'm also a past member of the State of Illinois Type 3 Incident Management Team. And for a year I was with the Eastern Area Regional Team, which is a multi-state area, and then a national team. Unfortunately, I didn't get to deploy with either one of those two teams. It just, busy summer of fires before and a busy summer after, but not for the year I was with the teams. I've got a short video to present it's something that is embedded in one of the introductory ICS courses, and you can take this online through the FEMA's training website, Independent Study Program. You can take the introductory courses online at your leisure and at the level of your interest. This is a nice video that touches and explains basically what the National Incident Management System is. That last slide, of course, doesn't apply to this brief presentation, but all of the rest of the information did. As you can see on the slide before you now, it summarizes what was in the video. The National Incident Management System, if ever I say NIMS, that's what I mean, defines a comprehensive approach that guides responders from the local level, state level, federal level, as well as private sector and non-governmental organizations, so that we are leveraging our abilities and our capabilities to effectively respond, or prepare for, respond to, and recover from an incident. We want to do that because we want to mitigate the loss of life, mitigate damage to property. Oh, okay. So we want to prevent and as much as we can bad things that happen, protect against things, mitigate, and recover from things when they do happen. What's on our minds right now in this area? What are you thinking about? What's been in the news? It doesn't affect us directly, but it has an effect on us indirectly. What? New Palestine, Ohio, or East Palestine, Ohio. That's exactly right. So that's an example, one you can think of. And when does NIMS apply? It's all the incidents, East Palestine, Ohio, Effingham, Illinois, variety of different incidents, whether they're big, little, and also this can and is applicable in the world of events. What do you see in there? Call it out. What do you see? Tornado. Somebody else. Hazmat situation. Flood. And you got a fire, and it looks like you have some hazardous material there that is at risk. What's important at an event? Okay, security, safety of all the people at the event. Anybody else? Crowd control. And all of those that you name for an event. Some of that apply at an incident. You betcha. The difference is an event, you have discretionary time to prepare for it. And an incident, it's, it happens and you got to deal with it. Priorities at the National Incident Management System are life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation or property preservation. And as you probably can imagine, that's true for any discipline within public sector. I'm retired law enforcement. But I work with people from the fire service. I also work with people from public health and from emergency management. I work with people from public works department. Those priorities that are listed are the bedrock, so to speak, of how we build our response, and they're applicable in any setting, whether it's a large or small scale incident or an event. The guiding principles that NIMS identifies are flexibility. I jokingly say that there's an additional beatitude in, I think, was it Matthew, book of Matthew, chapter 5 maybe, I don't know. It's blessed are the flexible, for they shall not break. In the incident management response and management world, we need to be flexible because we have to be successful. What's sweet, really sweet about a lot of the things we're going to touch on is an incident command organization that is activated to deal with a particular incident or event. It can be as big or as little as is needed, and it can grow and it can contract, kind of like an accordion. Standardization is also a very important principle that is to be honored when we talk about this topic. When I say standardization, what do you think of? Pardon? Consistency, things being the same. What kinds of things? Okay. Procedures. Sometimes procedures might be a little bit different, but let me back up with an example. In the 1970s, when a lot of this material was fleshed out and developed more, firefighters out in California were having a lot of loss from fires because there wasn't standardization of equipment fittings. Somebody would come in with a fire engine from another area and try to hook their hose up to a fire hydrant, and they didn't match. The fittings didn't match. And we called this person this name, and we called a person in another same discipline organization doing the same thing, we called them by a different name. So when we talk about standardization, it's about standardization of position and other types of titles and roles and responsibilities of those titles. And unity of effort just means we're all pulling the same direction. We're not having a tug of war. This person's got this idea going that way. Another person's got a different idea going that way. We're all pulling the same direction. The National Incident Management System framework has three major components right now. In its earlier iteration, the one that I learned when I started in this, on or about 2008, there were five components, but they've streamlined things and combined some things and felt this is a better way of organizing. So we're talking about three major components: resource management, command and coordination, and communications and information management. We're going to look very briefly at all three. Resource management, first of all, what's a resource in your mind? Anything you need to use? What else? Personnel and equipment that they bring with them. Very good. Okay. Some of those resources are durable, and some of those resources that you didn't name them, but you thought about them, I'm sure, are expendable or consumable resources like tires, fuel, water, those kinds of things. In NIMS, with this key management activities, identifying and typing resources is very important. Is everybody here from Effingham County? Pretty much. Anybody from another county? What county are you from, sir? Richland. Is that in Illinois? Okay. Your county emergency management agency should have a compilation of resources that are available at the local level should there be a situation that impacts your county. How many squad cars, how many fire engines, etc., and what type they are. Not all fire engines are the same. There's different levels typing, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm not sure what the final number is. A Type 1 pumps a whole lot of water. A Type 5 engine has 250, maybe 500 gallons of water on a brush truck that can go off-road to fight a fire. You can't use a pavement queen out off-road. So that effort has been ongoing, prior to, but especially after 9/11. Another key activity is qualifying, certifying, and credentialing personnel. To qualify, you have to take certain courses, receive certain training, and show that and pass tests and those kinds of things. Then you are certified through a parent agency, and that certification process is demonstrating that you can indeed perform the tasks of a particular job that you're going to work. And the credentialing involves you getting recognized by the agency that has jurisdiction that you are in fact qualified and you are certified, and therefore you can act in a particular capacity. By way of example, I was a Type 3 planning section chief. I had to go through the process of taking a number of different courses. I had to work at incidents or training events, and my supervisor would sign off that I could do certain activities successfully in my position task book. It wasn't until I got my position task book completed that all my information was sent to the credentialing committee, and they certified that I was qualified, I was capable, and then they gave me a qualifications card. Okay. Another key activity is planning for resources. If something happens here, it might show a gap where, you know what, we didn't have this resource, it was hard to get, maybe we need to try to get that for the future. Or planning for resources could be as simple as, you know, we really ought to have some emergency water on hand. If something bad happens, we want to be able to water the troops so that they don't go dry on us while they're working. And then we have to acquire, store, and inventory resources so we know what we have and know what we need to get. So those are the 4 key activities related to resource management. It's a big deal. I saw some of you shaking your head when I said your county EMA should have a list of resources. Is that not a monumental job to get it done once and then to keep it updated? It is a monumental job. It's very difficult. That's why local communities should do it and keep doing it. When we talk about command and coordination, here's a couple definitions for you to take a look at out of the training material. NIMS says that command is the act of directing, ordering, or controlling by virtue of explicit, statutory, regulatory, or delegated authority. So we rely on statutes, regulations, or delegated authority. A lot of the people that are working in positions of responsibility at East Palestine, Ohio, are probably not from East Palestine, Ohio. Why do you think that would be? What? They could that's exactly right. They could very well be impacted. They need to take care of their families and they need help. So some other people, positions of responsibility, they come in, they don't have any authority to act in East Palestine unless county, I don't know how the governing there, but it may be that the county board or the state delegates responsibility to them. That's the purpose of the delegation. And coordination, I just read the whole thing here. The systematic exchange of information among principals who have or may have a need to know certain information to carry out specific incident management responsibilities. Is coordination not a very important matter to attend to? Is it easy? No, it's not, especially when there's lots of moving parts. My wife and I sometimes are on the same page, and it's just the two of us. You know, so at a large-scale incident, think of East Palestine, Ohio, coordination is very important. NIMS has things in place that help with that. When we talk about command and coordination, we're talking about 14 NIMS management characteristics that a lot of what we teach is built upon. Much of what we teach is built upon. We've already talked some about common terminology. What's an EMT? What does that stand for? It might stand for something different if you're working at a factory, right? How about a TRT? Anybody have an idea what a TRT is? Pardon? Oh, they're talking outside. I thought it was somebody answering. It could be technical rescue team, which is out of the fire service. They come in and get people out of tight jams, and they're stuck in buildings and stuff like that. Or it could be a tactical response team, which is my old world, like a SWAT team. It has other meanings as well. Management by objectives. Businesses do that, right? How many prior military? Okay. Your commanders had mission orders. They identified objectives for your unit to accomplish. Manageable span of control. NIMS provides a range of a number of direct reports an individual they recommend could have responsibility for at an incident. It may have to be outside of that range under certain circumstances, so it's not a a law type thing. It's a a recommendation. But the span of control is important because a person needs to be able to effectively and safely and efficiently manage their direct reports. If a situation is very complicated, maybe that number of direct reports needs to be smaller than if you're doing a task that doesn't involve a lot of criticality, not threat to life and limb. Perhaps you can supervise more people or have more direct reports. I mentioned earlier that an incident command organization can be as big or as little as you need, and that's that modular organization. You turn on what you need when you need it, and you turn it off if you don't need it anymore. There are other topics here, but I won't get into all of them for purposes of this presentation. Here are the command and coordination structures, and we'll look at each one. MAC groups, the EOC or Emergency Operations Center, ICS or the Incident Command System, and this arrow down, double-ended arrow or double-arrowed bar at the bottom represents the Joint Information System. So the Incident Command System is a standardized approach to command, control, and coordination of on-scene incident management. Provides a common hierarchy within which personnel from multiple organizations can be effective. The system is a number of things. It's people, it's personnel, it's procedures, it's equipment, it's facilities, it's how you're going to do business together, and how you're going to communicate one with another, those kinds of things. And it's applicable at large-scale incidents, small-scale incidents, and big or small events. The principles hold true throughout. It's what you need is what changes. There are 5 major functional areas when we talk about incident command. The first one, of course, is the incident commander, and there are 3 major duties of the incident commander that he or she may delegate responsibilities for, and that's the public information liaison and the safety officer. The other 4 major functional areas are operations. They're the folks that are actually wrestling the snake, putting out the fires, doing the cleanup, those kinds of things. The planning section is responsible for being sure that the incident planning process is followed so that a proper incident action plan is prepared before each operational period begins. It's a big responsibility. Do you think there's been a lot of planning at the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment and hazardous materials mess? It's happened over several days. I don't know when that first happened, but it's been several days now, hasn't it? Do you think there will be a lot of advanced planning? Plans that you make for 36 to 72 hours out at East Palestine? Yes, there will be. Logistics is responsible for getting the right people and stuff to the right place at the right time. And finance and administration section is responsible for all matters related to the costs, tracking those costs, tracking claims for property that's been damaged, claims for injury if either a responder or if a responder is hurt, or if as the result of the actions of the incident management team, another person not part of the team is hurt. They're responsible for procuring things, generating contracts, all that kind of stuff. All the kind of stuff that I don't want to do. When we talk about communication and information management, I ask you, do you think communication is a challenge? Yes, it is. Already talked about that a little bit, but think of a large-scale incident response, how important it is that we have the ability to communicate effectively, and that we have information, the proper information flow between all elements of the response organization, the decision makers as well as the worker bees, boots on the ground that are actually dealing with the problem. So that's that bar at the bottom with an arrow at each end that kind of represents it. It crosses all three of the elements. You know, the people in ICS, in the Incident Command organization, they need to have the same information that your people at your emergency operations centers have. The people there are trying to provide support to the response organization. And the people in the multi-agency coordination, or MAC group, those people are decision makers in your communities. They're people with responsibilities to set strategic priorities and strategic direction. They need that information as well, and it's the responsibility of the public information officer and others to be sure that information flows freely, so that public information officers can release information to the public that is accurate and it comes in a timely fashion. If you are working a major incident, what would you need to know? You're working the incident. What do you want to know? Sure. How many people are involved? Okay. What's been the impact of this mess that you're going to help with? What else? What's the hazard? Okay. What do you got? Pardon? Okay, some specialized equipment that that is in your direct work area that you need to be mindful of. Okay. Anything else? Okay. What in your mind is the importance of the geography? Okay. So you want a picture of the area. Okay. Anybody else? Let me ask you this. If you're responding to an event, same thing? Same thing? Same thing at an event, right? You may not have a problem, but at events, what can happen? Yes. Think of the Sugarland concert at the Indiana State Fairgrounds a few years ago. They had some sort of weather event that took the stage down just before the concert was supposed to start. Fortunately, few people were injured, but if that had collapsed on the whole band, you know, a whole lot of people could have gotten injured. That's an incident within an event. I wrote some things down that we communicate in an incident action plan that people need to know. In the briefing, in the operational period briefing that supervisors get, they get a brief description of the overall impact on all, and they don't maybe get a lot of specific information about the numbers of people and in that, but they get overall broad brush of this is the problem that people have been dealing with up to now. We are here now to try to help this community. So I, as a responder, if I'm working, I want to know, where am I working? Who do I report to? Where do I report to them at? Do I need to take anything with me that I need to, that I'm going to need? What is it that you're having me, what is it you want me to accomplish by doing these tasks that you describe? Who do I report to? Who reports to me, if anybody? And how do I get support if I need it? And of course, when do I eat? Because that people, we need to know that. The last bullet there is, what do I do if at the levees west of Quincy years ago, they had to have a contingency plan in place to evacuate the responders who were attending to the seawall, the sandbag barrier. How do we get these people out of here in a hurry if it looks like we need to? So they had to have those kind of contingency plans in place. We've been talking about this planning process, been talking about communicating to people what they do. We do that through an incident action plan. An incident action plan for a lot of responses is in the incident commander's head. If a fire department responds to a fire at your home, at least initially, whoever's in charge of that fire response, more than likely, his incident action plan is in his head, and it's based on what he sees, what he is told, the equipment and the personnel that he has to respond, weather conditions, all those kinds of things. When we talk about anything that's going to last more than a few hours, we need to be thinking about actually writing it down. And because we can't remember everything that we need to remember unless it is written down. So here's a definition of the incident action plan. It's an oral or written plan containing the objectives established by the incident commander or unified command, and addressing tactics. That's what those operations personnel are going to do, and support activities for the planned operational period, generally 12 to 24 hours, it says. So how do we get these, what are you talking about, putting this plan together? There's a whole bunch of forms that have come up, that have been created over time based on a need, that help us communicate what people need to know about their work assignment. And we use a planning process to get these forms completed and assemble them in an instant action plan. That you take some of the online training, you'll see a planning P. It's just it's a visual description of the activities, the meetings that occur during a planning process, for any incident or event, but particularly if we're talking about something situation where we need a written incident action plan. Do you have any questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this was helpful. I'll be around for just a few minutes. If you don't want to ask a question in public, I'll be glad to talk with you. Just don't ask me a question. Let me know if I need an attorney before you ask me the question. Thank you.
I told you, I warned you, you're supposed to move up close, so that way I didn't have to hold the microphone. As I started to say, I'm with the American Radio Relay League. I am what's called the Illinois section manager. And today we're going to talk about what exactly is amateur radio. One of the things that you need to know is that it is a hobby that we have. And it is a very popular hobby, but it's also something that we use as service to our communities. So we make sure that not only do we have fun with the hobby, but we also do some service activities, which I'll talk about as we go along. And it's a way that we can bring all sorts of people together for communications. Oh, you're going to give me one of those, huh?
I'll give you a stand.
He's hooking that up. Yeah, well, so, right? As long as it doesn't fall down, I'm in good shape. We use amateur radio to talk around the entire world, not only to our neighbors across the street, things like that, but we talk all over the world with amateur radio. I will talk to you a little bit about the licenses as we go on, but the biggest thing I want you to know is that we have a lot of fun with the hobby. It's a great way to meet people. I have been doing it for over 60 years, and I learn something new every single year that I do it, every single day that I get on and do it. So it's a heck of a lot of fun to be able to do it. We come from all walks of life. It doesn't make any difference if you're that 5-year-old that just recently got licensed. Yes, in fact, 5 years old. Or if you're that 100-year-old. I had the opportunity to meet with a 102-year-old ham here recently. And it was a great opportunity to talk with them about the days even before I got licensed. So we come from all walks of life, whether we're doctors, we're lawyers, educators, like I said, 5-year-old children, students, all the rest of them. And how many people remember a program that had amateur radio on it, a comedy program? Do you remember that one? Oh, come on now. Nobody saw it? Last Man Standing, exactly. Okay, on Last Man Standing, they highlighted, and in fact, he did have an amateur radio license. And the entire staff of the Last Man Standing had their radio licenses. So what you actually saw there, it was a fake sign that they used, but in fact, it was a great opportunity to work with a whole bunch off of the Last Man Standing. So, whether we're using Morse code to turn around and talk, and Morse code being what we call CW, and you no longer are required to know Morse code to get your ham license. But whether you're using Morse code, whether you're using a microphone, whether you're using a computer to send messages, all of these different things are available to you. In addition to which, you have the opportunity to take and communicate through satellites in space. You also have the opportunity to turn around and work with the space station and be able to turn around and talk with the astronauts on the space station. One of the fantastic opportunities we have for kids today is to turn around and set them up in a classroom, grade school, high school, et cetera, classroom, middle schools, and let them talk to the astronauts up on the space station. And the majority of the astronauts that go up are actually ham radio operators. They've got their licenses, and there are specific times set aside for them to talk to the kids. When they're not working or not talking to the kids, we as amateurs have the opportunity to talk to them ourselves. And that's whether you're operating from very top of the highest hill around to the top of the mountain by you, or you're sitting at home, or maybe you're like me running down the road with the radio in the car. You have the opportunity to talk with them. I had a unique experience here, and I tell people about it, not all that long ago on a trip back from Phoenix, Arizona. I had my old flight board fastened onto my knee with my Morse code key. And I was sending Morse code. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was trying to stay awake. So I did what's called CQ, which is anybody out there that wants to talk to me. Had a gentleman in France come back and obviously gave him a signal report. And then he turned around and he asked me where I was. And I said that I was on Interstate 40, eastbound USA. He came back and he said, "Oh, rest stop?" I said, "No, driving." He came back to me and told me I was a crazy American. We had a great conversation going on that day. One of the other roles that we have is in times of a disaster, and we spend a lot of time preparing for this. We have a statement that says, "When all else fails, amateur radio." And we're very serious about that, because when we don't have the infrastructure available, then amateur radio is going to take over. Imagine, if you will, down here in Southern Illinois, if the New Madrid fault lets go. We are going to have massive destruction down here, and there's going to be no way to have regular communications. And that's when the amateurs step forward and they provide those communications for not only public service, but also for the general populace so that they can turn around and get messages out to their loved ones. You can communicate with hams whether you're here locally or whether you're trying to work around the world. And you can do that by voice, as I said, or you can interface a computer to your radio so that you can do it that way. And you can operate Morse code, even though it's no longer required as a requirement for your license anymore. There's still a lot of us that do it, and there's been a resurgence lately by people wanting to learn Morse code because they realize it's one other tool that they have in a toolbox that they can use. Also said you can talk to the astronauts up there. Hopefully, if you get your ham license, you'll be able to talk to them before they shut down the space station, because I understand that could happen sometime within the next 10 years. But we can also bounce signals, believe it or not, off the moon. We put our antenna up at the moon, we transmit up, it goes up to the moon, it hits the moon, and it bounces back down someplace else on Earth. And we talk to that person, whether they're 800 miles away, 8,000 miles away. We're talking to them by bouncing signals up off the moon. So it's kind of unique the way we can do some of the things that we have. We are all licensed by the Federal Communications Commission, and they are the ones that are responsible for our getting licenses. The testing is not that difficult to get your initial license as a technician. And a lot of it, I tell people, is common sense. And when the FCC looked at amateur operators, they said that we fulfill the need for emergency communications. So that's one of the reasons, in fact, that we were established as a hobby, was to provide that backup communication. They acknowledge that we have that ability, and they regularly talk about it. We just wish sometimes that they would take and move on some of the legislation that we have before them, so that we can make it a little bit easier for that. We've had a lot of lives that have been saved because of amateur radio. Whether it is the gentleman out there in the sailboat who runs into trouble out on the ocean and he uses amateur radio to get back. You realize the first messages that came from the Titanic were to an amateur radio operator. He was the one that decoded it and was able to start to get some help moving in that general direction. In addition to which, we work during hurricanes, we work during earthquakes. Any natural disaster out there, you're going to find amateur radio operators. Around here in our area, what do we have? We have tornadoes. And God forbid we have it, but one of these days we're going to have an earthquake again. So we provide communications during those times. Before you can operate as a ham radio operator, you have to get a license from the FCC. And it is not that difficult to get the license. You begin by studying for it. And once you take and get it, you can start in the hobby for less than $40 all the way up to however much money you want to spend. There's a beginning cost to take the test, and until just recently, there was no cost for the license. But now, as a new ham getting your license, the FCC requires a $35 application fee. But once you pay that fee, if you upgrade your license, there is no additional fee to it. The only time you pay that fee again, I got with it, is if you have to renew your license. So, well, as a consequence, that license is good for 10 years. Used to be we had 5 classes of licenses. We had the novice, the technician, the general, the advanced, and the extra. Today, we only have 3 classes of licenses. We have the technician, the general, and the extra. If you held a novice class license, you can continue to renew that, but they are not issuing any new ones. Same thing goes with an advanced class license. So there's really only 3 licenses today that are out there. Now, the technician, general, and the extra class. Back in my day, when I originally got licensed, I had to know Morse code. And to get started out, you started out with a novice class license at 5 words a minute. That's no longer, as I said, required. There is no code requirement. So you can get your ham radio license without learning Morse code. Back then, we used to take an upgrade. So you got your novice at 5 words a minute. You got your general at 13 words a minute. And then the highest class license was the extra, and you had to demonstrate the ability to send and receive at 20 words a minute. We don't have those requirements anymore. And becoming a radio operator is not all that difficult. There's a simple test to begin with for your technician license, and as I explained to people, a lot of it's common sense. And in fact, I just gave you today, while I was talking to you, one of the answers to one of the questions that will be on there. Who licenses you? You remember what I said before? Real easy, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. So now you've already got one of the 35 questions that you'll have on your test. There's 101 total questions that they could ask, but most of them, like I said, are common sense questions. How do you get involved in a hobby? Well, obviously you want to turn around and you want to join one of the local amateur radio clubs. In addition to which, I encourage people when they get into the hobby, because it is a form of public service, to become a Skywarn weather spotter. That means that you are not out there running around chasing tornadoes. Those people, as far as I'm concerned, have got a screw loose. That means you're sitting at home, you're looking out the window, and you're saying, gee, that looks an awful lot like it could be a funnel cloud, and it's now touching the ground, and I see it on the ground, and it's a tornado. And you report that to the National Weather Service. I would also hope that you don't do what a lot of people do. We discovered it takes 3 pieces of information before somebody realizes what they have. First thing that goes off is the sirens. Next thing, the announcements on the TV and the radio. What's the third thing do you think people do? They walk outside to look to see if they can see what's there. Worst thing in the world. You shouldn't be walking outside to look. You should be headed for the basement or a cellar or someplace to get out of the way. We also participate in an awful lot of things called walkathons, parades, etc. There's a river-to-river race that happens in southern Illinois every year that the runners move from the Mississippi River. I keep saying Missouri because it's almost a Missouri state line. From the Mississippi River to the Ohio River. It's an 80-mile run. And the entire communications for that are provided by amateur radio operators. At each checkpoint, we have a couple of amateur radio operators there, and then you have some of us like me who are what they call rovers. I'm in a vehicle, and I move from the Mississippi to the Ohio at 5 miles an hour across the whole 80 miles of the race, following the runners to make sure they're protected and we don't have any problems. So it's a great opportunity to get involved with what's happening. We also have what's called the Amateur Radio Emergency Services. And Robert Littler will be in right behind me, and he will talk about the Amateur Radio Emergency Services. But it is the opportunity for us to get even more involved in providing communications for our general public, for the folks around you, your neighbors, etc. So again, not only is it a great hobby, but it's also the opportunity for you to get involved in the community, whether it be in a bike race, a marathon. How many of you know that Chicago Marathon is all the communications for the Chicago Marathon is provided by amateur radio operators? Okay? Yep, some of us know that. So, I mean, these are some big races that we have around the country. Almost any one of the marathons out there, you'll find amateur radio operators providing the communications for it. Whether it is, hey, the runner has just passed this point, or it's, we need an ambulance over here because somebody just collapsed. During the Boston Marathon, when we had all the chaos, the first people to be able to transmit information were the amateur radio operators that were on scene. So again, we provide an awful lot of communications for that. Give you a little bit of history. We've been around for a long time, but in 1873, Mr. Maxwell developed what he called an electromagnetic field study. And this was a theory that he had about the electromagnetic theory. It was taken a step further by a gentleman that we all recognize in the amateur community as Marconi. And in 1901, Marconi made the first transmission across the water, across the pond, by using great big huge antennas and what was called a spark gap transmitter. Basically, that spark gas transmitter, and you can see pictures of it today, and there's a few museums that still have them. That spark gap transmitter did exactly that. It generated a huge spark. And with that spark came a certain amount of noise. So he was able to use that noise from that spark to be able to talk all the way across the pond. In order to curb interference back in the early days, the FCC turned around and said, we're going to restrict amateur operators to 200 meters. That's one of the frequencies that we had back then. That has since changed considerably. And we now have capability across the variety of what we call high frequency bands. And we also have what are called VHF, very high frequency, and UHF, ultra high frequency bands, as well as transmissions in the gigahertz range. So again, we have a variety of things that we didn't have back then, but we have them now. In 1914, a gentleman that we all consider at the ARRL as the founding person for the ARRL, Hiram Maxim, decided that he had a way to think about transmitting messages across the country. And in fact, that's why we are known today as the American Radio Relay League. He started this by relaying messages from one ham operator to another ham operator. And in fact, that's how we still continue to do it today. We have what's called the National Traffic System. In a National Traffic System, we pass traffic messages. We call it traffic. It's messages from one amateur to another amateur. So I may get a message for an Illinois amateur. Let's say you just got your license. Well, I may get a congratulations message for you from maybe England or Canada. And that way I can call you up on the phone and I say, hey, guess what? I have this that's called a radiogram. I have this message for you, and here's what it says. It's congratulating you. And oh, by the way, give me your email address, and I'll make sure that I send that message to you. And congratulations on becoming a ham. And guess what? You just met somebody from halfway across the world who's congratulating you on being able to get it. He did that first transmission back in the early days of the American Radio Relay League. And again, that's why we call it the Relay League, is because we relayed those messages across the country. Today, whether we use Morse code or what we call CW, we use phone, that's the microphone that we're talking into, single sideband, which is a form of communications that we have, FM, packet, TV. Did you know you can send TV signals as an amateur radio operator? That's one thing that we have. We have what's called packet, PSK. These are all modes that we can use to talk to each other. We can bounce those signals off the ground. We can bounce them off the ionosphere. We can bounce them off the moon, as I talked about before. And we can turn around and bounce them off the satellites and talk through the satellites. And it doesn't take a lot of high-tech equipment to do that. I actually turned around and worked through one of the satellites with two HTs that I had, two handy-talkies, two walkie-talkies, one set to this frequency, which was the uplink frequency, the other one set to the download frequency. And I sat out there, and I started at the horizon when I knew the satellite was coming over. And I just started following very slowly with both HTs until I heard the signal. And it doesn't last a long time, but it lasts long enough for me to talk to somebody halfway around the world. So two very inexpensive HTs, followed it up, got a chance to work through the satellites. As I said before, we're active in countries all over the world. From ages that are less than 10, I had the opportunity to read an article here recently about a 5-year-old little girl who got her ham radio license. So I tell people there's absolutely no reason why the rest of us as adults can't qualify for our license. To, again, as I told you before, the gentleman that I had to 102 years old. And no matter what your interest is, we have something in amateur radio that you can use. So I invite you to join us in the hobby. I would be glad to answer any questions that you have about it. Most important, I want to thank you for coming today, and please answer any questions that you want to ask. How hard is it to get the license? Very easy. How difficult is the first license? Very easy. And each subsequent license builds upon your knowledge. So it makes it very, very easy to get involved. Any questions? Oh, come on, somebody's got to have a question. When I used to teach, I used to say that the only dumb question is the one that you don't ask me. Oh, anybody? Oh, come on, you've asked a ton of questions. Yeah, you got the answers. Again, it's a fun hobby, but we also have some serious times. Good friend of mine was down in Puerto Rico during the hurricane down there, and we were able to stay in touch with each other using amateur radio, and that way I was able to turn around and let his wife know if there were any problems or if he needed anything back here. And works out very, very well. I was talking to a little 7-year-old girl here this morning who's working on getting her license. And I said to her, I said, one thing you need to know, and that is that you're going to learn some foreign languages while you're doing this. So, for example, one of the things you'll learn is that if you're talking to a Russian station, yes, we can talk to the Russian station. You can say "Do svidaniya" at the end of the conversation. We call that a QSO. So at the end of the QSO, "Do svidaniya." If I'm talking to a Japanese station, "Konnichiwa, watashi wa Bibi-san." Good evening, my name is Bibi, okay? You pick up all of this information, and you'll have a great time doing it. You'll also make friends all over the world. One of the things I do when I'm talking to young people, and I kind of cheat when I do it, but I don't tell them I cheated. I set it up ahead of time. I walk into the classroom and I say to them, how many people have got a cell phone? Well, let me ask you guys, how many people in here have got a cell phone? Okay, who can you talk to? Friends, relatives, parents, etc. I turn around and look at them. Can you talk to a man in England? I can. Can you talk to a man in Germany? I can. I turn around and I take out my cell phone, which is what the kids are used to using. Let's forget about this big boat anchor transmitter that I have over here. Let's pull out this little cell phone that we've got. And I say to them, let me let you talk to somebody. Well, I told you I cheated a little, but I set it up ahead of time. So there's a guy in England that I've already talked to, and I said, will you be available? I turn around and I call him. I turn around and he comes on and we start talking. And the kids are going, is he really in England? And I go, here, talk to him. Boy, have I got the young people's attention at that point. All of a sudden they can begin to see where, hey, this is for real. This is something that we can have some fun with. So I spend a lot of my time trying to encourage young people to get into the hobby. We are getting to be what we call an older generation. I'm 73 years old here in another month. I've been doing it for over 60 years. I'm what they call an OT. You know what an OT is? It's an old timer. So I'm trying to get as many young people into the hobby, but that doesn't preclude anybody sitting in this room, because we want as many people in the hobby as we can get. So again, I want to thank you for coming. No questions? Pardon me? How about a story? Well, what would you like to hear about? Well, I will tell you that I spend an awful lot of time talking to community groups and amateur radio operators about earthquakes, particularly since I live down here in southern Illinois. I live over in Marion. Actually, I'm 6.2 miles south of Marion, down by Lake of Egypt, but my backyard's a national forest, so it's great for where I live. Plenty of room to put up antennas, everything else. One of the things that I have expressed to people when I'm doing earthquake presentations is that when it hits, the statistics that we have are that there's going to be, on the very first day, 750,000 people who do not have any access to communication. We have what's called a donut hole. Think of a donut out there. You got this little hole in the middle. That's the donut hole. Well, when that earthquake happens, that donut hole, there's absolutely no communication coming out of there. And I've demonstrated to people when they had the Salt Lake earthquake, Salt Lake City earthquake back a few years back, during the first almost 24 hours, there was next to nothing coming out of that donut hole in communication except by the amateur radio operators. We have the ability to operate, whether it's with a battery, with our generators that we all have, whatever it is, we can get on and we can operate, we can provide communication. This is being recognized by the federal government now. And USGS, U.S. Geological Society, has a program called Did You Feel It? It's been around for a number of years, but it was primarily based upon you who was not necessarily an amateur radio operator. And the intent of it was that you would get on the internet and you would send them a message about whether or not you felt it, whether you had damage, etc. But I want you to think for a minute. You're in a donut hole. There's no communication coming out of there. So they have no idea what your damage is. They have no idea whether or not you need medical help or anything like that. So along the way, a good friend of mine, Ollie, out in California, turned around and he said, you know, there's got to be a way that we can help. And they had had a minor earthquake out there, so he contacted USGS, U.S. Geological Society, and he said, by the way, have you heard about amateur radio operators and what we do out here in California during an earthquake? And USGS said, well, yeah, kind of, we know something about you guys, but so what? Well, the more he talked about them, the more he talked with them, I should say, the more they turned around and started to realize, hey, these guys can provide us communication out of the donut hole. So they got together, put together some programs, did some field test studies with it, looked like it was going to work out real well, then turned around and said, well, why don't we have a practice exercise? Set it all up, everything was going along fine. What do you think happened in the middle of the practice exercise? They had a real earthquake. Perfect opportunity to demonstrate what we can do. So it worked out. You want a good story that tells the truth about what we can provide in the public service? That's it. As I said to you, communications-wise, I drive from the Mississippi River to the Ohio River, providing the backup communications for those people. Whether it's just to protect the runners, whether it's to turn around and say, hey, folks, we've got an emergency over here. I need an ambulance over here. And we provide that type of communication throughout the entire race. Yes, it's a very long day for me. I happen to be the guy who goes out there at 1 o'clock in the morning when we have bad weather before it, and I drive the entire course from the Mississippi to the Ohio looking for any hazards that we may have with the runners. Also drive up into the hills over there to make sure that we can get the runners safely out of the hills down into, because they would normally start up there. But if it's real bad weather, I make sure that we bring them down below. And my typical day starts when I leave my house about 12:30 at night, and it ends about 12:30 the next day when I get home. Fortunately, I'm not the only one in the vehicle. I have another gentleman with me who can do the navigation and some of the stuff. These are some of the things that we do. Other questions? Well, if there are no more, I would thank you very much for coming. If by all means you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of anybody from the radio club here in this area. They'll be glad to talk to you about it. Get a hold of me. We have what are called Elmers. Elmers are amateur radio operators that help new operators. And I have been operating as an Elmer from almost the day I got my license helping people. So by all means, feel free to get a hold of me. My cards are out on the table out there. Also, if you have kids, I recommend you stop by the table. I have a great brochure. I think it's great because I helped put it together. But I have a great brochure for parents on helping kids get into amateur radio. Again, thank you. Russ?
But yeah, but we still don't have it up on the screen. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah. What's that? Wow. Many years ago, way too many years ago, I had a physician at the North Shore Medical Center basically tell me, when your knees hurt enough, you'll have them replaced. Believe me, you'll know when you need them. I'm getting there. So I'm going to sit on the stool a little bit and talk. There we go. Sit down, Bill. Thank you very much. So today we're going to talk about ARES and RACES and Auxcom, and how many amateur radio operators are there in the room? One. Several. How many want to be amateur radio operators? Okay, well, all right, depends on my sales pitch. Is that it? Oh, Lord, I don't know about that. All right, let's get to it. This little piece right here, I guess, when all else fails. There are a lot of people that take exception to that, but there's a reason for it, and we'll get there and we'll talk about that a little bit. All right. So hopefully, oh, come on, you can do it. How about that? Did it go? All right, so you may have already been told several times, so I'm going to say it very quickly. The Communications Act of 1934, as amended and revised, is the latest enabling act of how amateur radio operation works in the United States. Before the FCC, that's what the enabling act created, there was the Federal Radio Commission, and that was basically out of the Department of Commerce. And before that was even formalized, the Department of Commerce and the U.S. Navy kind of did battle over who was going to run wireless. And that was way, way back in the day. So the FCC, well, it's 1934, so it's got a pretty good run. Part 97 is the rules and regulations for amateur radio service. And when amateur radio started, and has never changed, the first part of the Radio Act, or the parts of the Radio Act, basically realized that they needed a group of people that were trained in wireless techniques. It could help the communities. And if you actually look at the first couple of subparagraphs, it'll talk about emergency services and services to the community as a reason why amateur radio even exists. One of the very few radio services that actually calls out helping the community. Try again. Did it go? Very good. So what the FCC did is they followed the tradition of the Federal Radio Commission, and they assigned spectrum to the amateur radio operators that frankly they at the time believed would never be used. In fact, there's a couple of books out there, one of them the ARRL actually publishes, called 200 Meters and Above. Federal government basically said all of our activity is going to be at certain wavelengths and longer wavelengths, and everything shorter wavelengths, well, we'll give it to the amateurs because who cares? Well, the amateurs proved that the higher the frequencies, the shorter the wavelengths, the more you could travel and the more you could get done. So obviously, the FCC and the government got involved and said, well, then I guess you'll get little bits of this and this, and we'll take the rest. Which is the way it goes. So the American Radio Relay League came from the idea of actually transmitting messages throughout the country using relay stations. And that's how the name came about, and that's how we in amateur radio still offer some of our services to the community. Health and welfare traffic, or basically ground truth, where you actually go out your storm spotting and everything else, you send messages back in. Sometimes it's direct into NOAA, and sometimes it actually has to be handled by relay stations. So the amateur radio emergency service. So I like to tell the story about the fact that ARES, everybody remember back in their high school days who ARES was? God of War? Who was the other god of war? There were two that you learned about. One was called Ares and one was called Mars. And essentially, no, that's not where this came from. But the American Amateur Radio Emergency Service started in about the same time as the FCC in 1935. And we'll get into Mars in a minute. Mars was the military affiliate radio service, and that's the one, if you recall, that they did a lot of phone patches in Vietnam. Where people wanted to call back and they got a 30 to 45 second, hey, I'm doing fine, I'm here, everything's going to be okay. All right, well, this works great, except I have to be able to see it. All right, the number one issue, the takeaway on this particular slide, I'm going to really power through this because it's late in the day. We can have question and answer at the end. Ares and amateur radio, especially Ares. Ares is not affiliated with the government. Ares is a program. All right. Basically, the ARRL put together the Ares program for training and some kind of hierarchy so that we could actually get together and we could perform public services. That's it. You don't have to be an ARRL member to be a Ares member. In fact, as the Ares honcho for the state of Illinois, I don't care. I mean, you get a license, you want to be involved, great. The tent is open to anybody. I do know that people wonder, I'll say it this way. We don't do government, we're not affiliated with the government, but we train operators to work with either government or private agencies like the Red Cross and Southern Baptist or Salvation Army, as well as your county EMA offices. We do the actual field training. The folks that you want to work with as a volunteer are going to train you for their way of doing things, their structure, and how they want their, how you as a communicator are going to interface with their organization. We don't do that. All we do is make sure that you know how to operate a radio and you know how to handle traffic. Now, there's never one when two will do, right? So there was in 1952, there was another actual codified emergency services called RACES. This actually became part of the amateur rules and still exists. It's much, much smaller. Slowly, the commission has been reducing its presence in Part 97, the amateur radio service rules, but it still exists. And in fact, the state of Illinois has a group of, and I know it was something I said. So radio is not for everyone. So the long and the short of it is, RACES is something that happened back in the 50s. It was a big deal back in the 60s, but essentially it's fading away because, of course, we have Ares for training. RACES is a call-up sequence. So in other words, a governor can say, I want radio operators to help me out, and he activates RACES. But RACES itself is practically non-existent. There are very few RACES organizations left, even in the state. Notice that it says FEMA oversight. That's a plot point. All right, so what's the difference? Well, basically, like I say, the Ares is just civilians getting together in a program, helping each other and helping in the public. However you want to help in the government, but you're not in the government. So RACES is a government activity. Ares is a training organization that gets people ready to work with whatever organization. Served agencies, I believe is what it's called. And we just get people ready for it. But RACES is a governmental activity. And like I said, it's actually controlled, what's left of it, by FEMA. All right. Come on. We'll get there. All right. So, yeah, we'll get there. There are 102 counties in the state of Illinois. There are not 102 county emergency coordinators. There's not even 50. It's very hard to get a lot of people active, especially after COVID. So what we have done is we've stepped up a bit, and we've taken the state and we've followed IEMA, the Illinois Emergency Management Agency's regional breakdown of the state, and we made these districts. All right. Anybody that's actually worked with IEMA will understand that these are, IEMA calls them regions, Aries calls them districts. It's the same thing. Notice that 4 is quite small. That's because it has Cook County in it, so there's only 2 other counties attached to District 4. And notice that there are larger, depending on population, whatever, larger districts. Each one of these districts is going to have, ultimately, when we get people back from COVID, each one of these districts will have a district emergency coordinator that will work with the county level people, and that way we'll get back on our feet. Right now, we are missing the District 4 DEC just passed. The District 6 stepped down, and the District 8 stepped down because they had other things to do. That's what's happening across most volunteer organizations right now. COVID has burnt a lot of people out. People are stepping down, not only from radio, they're stepping down from volunteer fire departments, they're stepping down from a lot of volunteer organizations. Hopefully we can bring that back. But we're, like I said, it's a long haul to come back from COVID in every way. All right. So the ARRL, and I think that was discussed before, there's all kinds of training and continuing education and everything else in ARRL besides emergency operations. But I will tell you that ARES is the #1 major program in the ARRL. We're the ones that train the people in the field. There's other things that you can learn at the ARRL, but ARES is the bigger of the organizations within the ARRL structure. There is something called the National Traffic System, and back in the Vietnam era, the National Traffic System, not to be confused with Mars and phone patches or a 30 to 45, 60-second phone call, there were actual health and welfare messages that were handled by Morse code, by voice, by other techniques to get messages back and forth to the United States. And there was a time, the National Traffic System, even in Illinois, where they would handle hundreds of messages a day. Now it's quite less, as you can imagine, because essentially we're in a peacetime and we have all other forms of communication that under normal circumstances work quite well. But we still have the National Traffic System and we still use it daily for the purpose of being ready should the need arise. One of the things the ARRL does is support what's called Field Day. It happens in the late spring. Essentially, you have a group of amateur radio, many groups of amateur radio operators go out and they set up in the field, they put up their own antennas, they operate their generators, they've got tents, they've got all kinds of things. Now, if you're interested at all in seeing how amateur radio works in the field environment, that's the thing to do. Check out the Field Day activity. You'll be more than welcome. Normally it's a weekend, so you can come out and you see what's going on. And most of the larger Field Day organization activities have what's called a Get on the Air tent, where you can go on, you don't have to have a license. Somebody will show you how to operate the equipment, and you just go in and operate your equipment until you get a good sense of what it's all about. I really recommend. Yes? Go see him. Okay. Let's see, what else are we going to do here real quick? I'm trying to kind of breeze through this. Anything anybody sees that they just want to follow up on, we can stop. Okay. All right. This is the one that I try to talk about, but people's eyes begin to glaze over because we go into technical stuff that probably I'll just hit the high points. Why amateur radio? Well, essentially, remember the original slide that says when all else fails. There are many techniques for people to talk to each other these days. Many. You've got as much texting as much as voice. You've got satellite phones. You've got all kinds of things that people can use. And what happens the first thing that you have an emergency, a major disaster of any kind? they stop working. If you have hurricanes, your cell towers either get blown down or your cell sites get flooded with water and they stop working. If you have other activities like, all right, here's my pop quiz. How many earthquake faults are there in Illinois? You don't get, you're already there. There are 2. There's, a lot of people think there's only 1. The New Madrid Fault. Well, that's on the west side of Illinois. On the east side of Illinois is the Wabash Fault. They come down and they join below Illinois. If those 2 have a party, the bottom half of the state of Illinois is going to be one big mess. Nothing's going to work down there. So what we're trying to do is ready to help those folks by having everybody in the surrounding states and obviously in the northern part of the state be able to be deployed as required and if asked. One of the things that I always have to say in any presentation is you never go on your own anywhere, ever. This is called self-deploying, and you don't do it. You get in the car, you drive down and say, here I am to save the day. The nicest thing that's going to happen is you're going to be told by a state trooper, go away. That's the nicest thing that's going to happen. I said state trooper for a reason. You really don't want to go to the other versions of not so nice. So we never do that. We wait until somebody says, yes, we need you, and this is what we want you to do. Most of the time, a lot of the amateur radio operators, when asked to participate, will stay at home. They have their stations there, they have their generators, their batteries, and everything else, and they'll be asked to relay messages and keep networks working so nobody's out in a really bad part of the world and nothing works, and and the first responders have to go save them too. Well, that's not a good plan. All right, very, very quickly. So again, anything that is a public, or I should say a, how do we want to say, they say carrier networks, but your telephone services, your cell phone services, your satellite services, your texting, all of your wireless, all your cable, all the rest of that, every one of them has a major chance of failing, especially if they're in the actual touched area by earthquake, by floods, by derechos, or whatever. How many of you have seen pictures of what a derecho does to a TV tower? I mean, it twists it, that's the twist it, and the next thing you know, it's bent over half or it's on the ground entirely. That's just straight wind. That's not even a tornado. So when we have in the Midwest derechos or these ridiculous training tornadoes that come in, lots of things fail very, very quickly and very hard to recover because the power lines are down and everything else is down. Cell stations or cell sites, they call them, for your cellular service, wireless service, most of them don't have generators anymore. There's too many of them to have generators everywhere, so they run on batteries. And hopefully, they'll get the generator out there fast enough, or the power will come back fast enough, the battery doesn't go bad. If the battery goes flat, it's down, that cell's down. If the tower's still up and the antennas are still attached. All that happens in bad weather, and almost always happens, obviously, in the coast, the East Coast, Gulf Coast, the West Coast. That, if you watch that, you'll see that's the biggest problem. They just, all of a sudden, they just lose a lot where they really need it. They lose a lot of common carrier. And there's the points of failure that have been discussed. And it goes on, but one of the biggest problems with wireless networks continues to be capacity. All right, here's another one for you. Pop quiz. What's the worst day on the calendar for wireless carriers? I'm not talking about bad weather or incidents or disasters. The worst. It's Mother's Day. It is. When I used to work in Houston on what used to be the only cellular, none of the CDMA, none of this LTE, 5G, or anything else, just good old-fashioned analog cellular back in the day. We would have this spring, everybody has it, the beltway around Houston, and you just wanted to go home and cry because essentially everybody in their brother would get on Mother's Day and try to call Mama, and the system would just go to its knees, and it would stay there the day, and there was nothing you could do about it. I don't care how big a network you built, it was done. Nothing but red lights everywhere, and you just, oh please, let the day be done, because there was nothing you can do. It still happens. We have so many more carriers and so many more operations, more cell sites, it still happens. It's just, people will get on and they immediately want to talk to somebody, or they want to start texting, or what's the worst one? Next pop quiz. What's worse than voice and what's worse than texting on wireless? You see it all the time. I guarantee you every one of you have seen it, and every one of you said, why are they doing that? You know what it is. Video. They get on, everybody gets on the thing and starts doing video. Well, I tell you what, video takes even more than voice. It's hard to deal with. So again, those sometimes go on for many, many days, and people are going to be looking for communicators to help pass traffic using alternate methods. We don't do video very often, and we don't do very long messages. We do, amateur radio operators are trained that they keep it down to 25 to 30 words. I'm fine, family's fine, or I'm at Sally Mae's, call this number, or whatever. We really want to keep the capacity under control. Satellite services the same way. Anybody have, oh goodness, I knew it this much. Skylink. Who has Skylink? Are you familiar with Skylink? Are you familiar with Elon Musk, who has his fingers in everything? So Elon Musk has decided it'd be a great idea, and I don't know that people agree with him, that he is going to put this huge constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit around the planet. Little tiny satellites, thousands of them. And this is to give everybody some kind of universal wireless service, no matter where you are. And boy, the astronomers hate him because they reflect and they make their astronomy really, really difficult. And I don't know how long it's going to last. Right now, one of the things he made headlines about 6 months ago, he started giving the people in Ukraine Skylink service. I don't know how long that's going to last either. But people think that's going to save them. It's not. It's still a capacity. It's still finite. It's still going to be a real difficult time. Besides, the last time I looked, the cheapest Skylink base station was $500. A lot of people don't want to do that. So, we do public safety work. We do infrastructure assistance. We do all those kinds of things that the served agency wants, and by that, again, I mean it's either the county EMA, it's Red Cross, it's Salvation Army, it's Southern Baptist, it's whoever, or it's the state. I happen to be affiliated with IEMA, the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, at the state level, and we have people that go and communicate, or even more importantly, they're there to help. One of the training classes that we'll talk about called OXCOM, you're literally told, you may be told to sweep the floor and take out the trash, and that's what you're going to do. Okay, whatever you want, we'll do it. We can. And every once in a while, they might say, okay, we want you to stay and watch on the radio. Well, we can do that too. Bill's laughing. All right. I don't know, that picture's not that large, is it? So every amateur radio operator after 2 years have a radio station that looks like that, right? No. No. So one of the things the people that come for introduction to amateur radio is, no, we don't do that. That person's very proud of the station, and I'm proud for him to have it, but he spent a whole lot of years and a whole lot of time, probably second jobs, saving a lot of money to get a station that looks like that. Amateur radio operators are not going to throw away your children's college fund or anything else, or if they do, you can hit them over the head and say, I told you to do it. But the long and short of it is, we don't do that when we first start. We get a radio, we try it out, we figure out what we want to do, and then we figure out how we can fit into like emergency services. Sometimes you'll have a small station and put an antenna up, and that's what you do, and that's the way it's going to be. But what does it bring? It brings a trained person with the ability to operate the equipment they do have when it's needed. That's what amateur radio brings. I may have to get rid of that picture, Bill. So when you get really into helping out and you are working with a served agency that wants you to be in the field, a lot of folks build what's called a Go Kit. So they get a little box and they put the radios in it, and they've got a battery and they've got an antenna kit, and they know how to go out in very, very minimal setup, and they operate. Now, I was just down in Florida, and I didn't take a picture of it because because it was the villages in Florida, and they're kind of, well, they're not really excited about amateur radio antennas, but we took some wire, about 60 feet of wire, and attached a golf ball to it. We threw it through one tree about 20 feet, and we threw it to the other tree about 10 feet off the ground, and we tied it off, and literally we talked to most, depending on the frequency and depending on the time of day, we actually talked to several states in the north from Florida. You can do that if you know how to do it and you have the equipment to do that with. Well, you can imagine when somebody is helping out and just about everything else isn't working, a person that can actually figure out how to do that kind of thing with minimal equipment, with painter poles or with step ladders or with whatever, you get on the air and actually pass traffic, you're going to be a commodity. Somebody's going to want you to help. No doubt about that. And you're going to want to help. That's why you're there. We also do a lot of digital communications. And in fact, that is one of the intriguing things that happened in the last couple of years. Believe it or not, I'm going to say that awful word lawyer. We actually had a group of attorneys in Los Angeles, yes, California, get together and say, using the technique called WinLink, we will allow you to pass personal information without violating HIPAA. Because the technique uses what's called compression. Now, it's not encryption, it's compression. Anybody with the ability to decompress could read it, but that means that you actually are intentionally attempting to violate someone's privacy, and so the lawyer said, well, that's okay, then we'll let you get away with it. Now, the rest of the attorneys in the country are basically saying, oh, I don't know about that, so we'll have to see. But we carry a lot of information back and forth for hospitals and for sheriff's departments and for other activities. We're also, right now in the state of Illinois, we're also working with the Illinois Guard and EMA and some other state agencies to pass traffic with them on our test, for the express purpose of being ready should the bad day ever come. Okay, so the number one limitation for all this is you got to be licensed. And there was a time, not that long ago, I hope, there was a time that I had to sit down and I had to do 20-word-a-minute code, and I had to do it right, and I didn't pass the first time, I'm perfectly honest. But ultimately I did, and I passed basically a sophomore level engineering test, and that's not amateur radio anymore. The examinations are not that difficult. The classes are very well structured, and you don't have to do Morse code. You can do it if you want, but you don't have to. You can go all the way to the highest level, extra class license in amateur radio, and you don't have to do code. A lot of us really wish that happened 50 years ago, but anyway, it's happening now. I recommend, if you're interested in all, like I say, you go to the field day. It's coming up in the spring. You could also go to one of these classes and you can see what's going on and what's happening. There also, just go on and look at our amateur radio license course or information, and you'll find online a lot of places have free amateur radio test sites where you can go in and you can see what the test is and why the answers are what they are and all the rest of it, just to see if that's something you're interested in. But you definitely have to be licensed to operate as an amateur radio operator. It's just the way it is. The other thing is, like this is saying, we try to keep our messages down to 25 words or less. Normally 30 words will be fine, but we do that. And there are always the problem with propagation, where you think you're going to be talking to the southern part of the state, because that's what we're trying to do. We want the northern part of the state to talk to the southern part of the state. Well, you can talk to Florida, great, but you can't talk to, Paducah. I mean, it just happens. That's just the way it works. So you have to have relay stations. And a lot of us do. We actually will communicate to somebody 2 states away to come back to talk to the station you wanted, because it's just too close and the propagation won't support it. Okay, the brag sheet. So yes, over 100 years, we've been helping out the best way we can, and most of the time we've done a very, very good job of it. The only time we've ever had any fall downs is the fact that it wasn't ever going to work in the first place. And the story I tell is the folks that were sent down to San Juan during Hurricane Maria, and I got to tell you, just about nothing worked correctly or the way it should have for the first couple of days in San Juan. It just didn't. There are stories of people showing up at the big EOC, the Emergency Operations Center in San Juan. There were so many satellite dishes, so many antennas, so many generators. Nobody could talk to anybody. It was just a mess. So the only time that our people, our amateur operators that went down to help, they went 60 miles out, and then they were doing fine. And they were welcome with open arms. But the actual, it's always the same. Everybody wants to jump into that big center, and they want to make it work. And it was really rough for the first couple of days until people started saying, wait a minute, well, hold it. You're important and you're not, and you need to go away, and you need, and they finally sorted it out. That's the way human nature is. But the amateurs did a pretty good job once they got out in the field. Okay. So some of you just saw Mr. Beebe, the section manager. I am the section emergency coordinator. In this part of the world, remember the map, in District 7, we have Josh Kittle, that's his contact information. In District 9, if you remember the map, there's Jim Hudson. He's in Shelbyville. Actually, lunchtime, I went to visit him. So he'd be interested, those folks and I would be interested in telling you more and having a phone call or showing you or contacting you with people local or whatever it is. Russ, stand up again. Mr. Russ, more than happy to work with you. Any questions? Yes, I'm doing a turbo mode, but anybody with questions at all? Thanks for the chair. You'd feel better. Nothing? Okay. Well, I'm happy to be here, but I do know that it's been a long day for a lot of. How was the weather seminar? I'm sure it was great. That's and to be honest with you, one of the things on our areas organizations is we push that a lot. It's not just radio. We say, hey, there's a weather seminar every 2 years. You need to go and take that seminar and don't sleep through it. Actually participate. So I'm sure it was really, really good. Are we done? Then I'm going to say 73. Thank you for being here.
Ready? Great. Okay, folks, appreciate you being here. My name is Ralph Rounds. I am a significant weather observer for the National Weather Service out of Lincoln. I'm also a member of the Cocoa Ross, or what is called Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, Snow. My station is ILEF10. If you're wondering what that is, that means I'm in Illinois, Effingham County, station number 10. So, Russ asked me to talk to you folks about weather stations, and the big question is, well, why have one? Okay, I'm going to show you the oldest weather station there is, and everybody go like this, hold your finger up, find out which way the wind's coming out. If you're older, like some of us are getting, you have arthritis or whatever, and some joint or whatever says, yo, man, the weather's changing. Me, I've broken both legs, so yikes, I know when something big is happening. So, why have a weather station? A lot of people don't think of a home weather station a whole lot, but why would you have one at home? The reason is, well, I know what the temperature is doing outside. Some people like keeping track of it, maybe making a little graph at home or a record book so they can find out what's going on. Check the rainfall. My rain gauge at home for my weather station has a teetering rain gauge in it. So the teeter-totter goes up and down. The faster the teeter-totter goes, the faster the rain is coming down, and of course records how much rain comes in. Let's see what the barometric pressure is doing, if it's going up or down. I can tell you, after years of having various weather stations, if I see an arrow like this and going down even straight down, we're in trouble, because that means a big low pressure system is moving in, and the weather's going to usually turn pretty ugly. And some weather stations even tell you what the moon phases are. What kind of weather station do I need? I had to answer this question myself a couple years ago, because my wife and I were talking, and I said, you know, I could really use a good weather station. She says, well, go find out what's there. There are as many different kinds of weather stations that you can think of that are possible. Some people get happy with the little thermometer and say, okay, well, it's 90 degrees outside, that's all I need to know. The little one there in the middle up the top, it has the basics. The plastic part works as your anemometer, so you can find out how much wind you have, wind direction, plus it has a little rain gauge in it. The other one next to it is pretty basic. It'll give you temperature, barometric pressure, lets you know how fast the wind is going. The other one is just a manual rain gauge. The one in the middle on the bottom is pretty much like what I have at home. And it was built by Davis, and it's called the Vantage View. And as you can see from the last one, it's a lot more elaborate. This one, for those that would want to go that route, they have their anemometer and wind direction separate from the weather station itself. And what they will tell you is that for your rain gauge, they want it close to the ground, but if you want real good wind speed, you got to have it up high. And that's why you find some that are separate, like that one there on the bottom. How much do these guys cost? Some weather stations, like that little plastic one with a little rain gauge, $10, $12. Some of them, like the last one there, well, can you say 4 figures? I saw some on, when I was doing my search, that were going into the $3,000, $4,000 price range. And if you want one that can pick up lightning, well, then you're looking at bigger dollars, because it's very expensive equipment. The nice part is you can go from simple to professional equipment. And the other choice, like it showed there, is you have to decide whether you want to go wireless, which is what I have, or you can hook up wires. I was talking to a gentleman earlier today, And because he has steel siding and a steel roof, and he wanted his further out from the house, he went with a wire system. So he ran the wire to the ground, and at home is wireless, but my weather unit outside is about 75 feet away from the base in the house, and I still get a pretty good reception on it. The list that you see there, that's the name of some of the manufacturers for the different weather stations you can buy. Accurite is more on the bottom end of things. They do have some that are a little bit more expensive, but they're kind of on the bottom side. Davis has a lot from both ends of the scale. And again, that's what I have at home. Another popular one is Ambient and LaCrosse. But if you do an internet search, you're going to find these all over the place. And what you decide to go with kind of is, again, fitting to what you would like to have for yourself. The best thing you can do to determine which weather station you want is educate yourself. How many of you have ever heard of Consumer Reports? Better Business Bureau. Great. I tell people look at Consumer Reports, and they are a great organization to go to. No, this is not a commercial for them, but Consumer Reports does all their own research. They receive advertising funds from nobody. So you're going to get a clear understanding of what is and what isn't. But again, just kind of educate yourself as to what you want, and you should do pretty well. How much? Well, what I have at home, including my little handheld radio, binoculars, and other things that I use, I have about $500 tied up into everything. That includes my weather station, my rain gauge, my snowboards, snow stick, and my radio. And this little device that popped up from Davis, and that is actually what puts my weather station on the internet. So not only do I have a page that I can pull up on my computer here, but it also came with an app for the telephone. So I can be wherever and pull up my weather station at home. I can be in St. Louis or northern Wisconsin or wherever, go to the internet and still be able to pull up my weather station. What can I do with a home weather station? Number one, like I said, you can keep track of temperature. Some people keep local records. Me, I'm also part of that organization called CocoRaHS, and I keep track of my annual rainfall, precipitation, snowfall, whatever comes that way. And there you go. I don't know if that's big enough to see. The one with the green and white bars is what I actually recorded for precipitation in 2022. The one next to it with all the zigzag lines going up and down, that's what I've done since 2008. And like I said, you can just have fun with it. And the nice part is, with a weather station at home, if you got little ones at home, you might want to be able to get them involved too. So you can become a volunteer weather observer or spotter. Some of you might have taken the Skywarn training, or like I did, I joined CocoRaHS. Depending on what you get, you can find yourself on a network. Now, like I had mentioned, with my weather station at home, the Davis has its own WeatherLink network, and that's the one on the top left. To my surprise, there are a lot of people that have and are tied in the local area in that equipment. CocoRaHS, it's an added to what I do at home, and there's right now approximately 6 active stations in Effingham County. So, plus you'll have the weather information at your fingertips, and like I said, here's what I can pull up on my laptop. And you can see it has temperature, wind direction, humidity, sunrise, sunset, how much rain came down, and then the little picture there, that's what the phone app looks like for me. Here's some added information for you if you want to go with it. And write down the website. It's a good website to have. It's called WW 2010. It's put on by the University of Illinois at Champaign. And it has an index of weather terminology. Plus it has access to other things. So if you've ever heard of a multi-cell, supercell, single cell, warm front, cold front, this is the place to go, and it'll actually tell you the information. It'll tell you cloud types, what's the difference between freezing rain and rain, and actually how that happens. It'll show you the cloud layers, air layers, give you an idea. Here's another part of the WW 2010, a little bit of a graph there so you can find out what they mean by what's hot, what's not, air. This is part of the National Weather Service website, and this is one of the places I go every morning to find out what's going on. And right below it there on the bottom left, you'll see a little area. That's the top of their what they call weather story page. And I can find out what's going on that day and possibly what's even going on ahead. This is the fun one for me, the Storm Prediction Center. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma is the ones that kind of calls the shots on what's happening with severe weather. And if you look, there's a tab over there on the far right that says outlooks. And I know Russ, when he was running ESDA, spent many hours probably looking at that, because that shows you what kind of severe weather is coming your way, what to anticipate, what to look for. And the one that's there next to fire, it's called hazards. That is a really good one because that snowstorm that we had going through the other day, it showed that rain and snow, the main winter hazard stretched all the way from Colorado up to northern Michigan and lower peninsula Michigan, and it was all pink, which means there was a winter storm warning out for that entire area from Colorado to Michigan. And then the CoCoRaHS page. CoCoRaHS is a great organization. It stands for Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, Snow. And their job there, it's an all-volunteer organization, and we track precipitation, rain, hail, snow, sleet, freezing rain, but not fog. Why? Well, fog is condensation, not precipitation. So that is that part of the weather stations. Any questions? Yes. How long have I had mine? 2 years now. And I've had it, I gotta say, when money into a weather station was worth it, I had that were less expensive. The $100 I had, it folded within about a year, and I got tired of changing batteries. The Davis, what's nice about it is that it's solar powered with a battery backup. So even if we have a couple days of where it's gray and dreary and all that, and there's not a whole lot of sun, it still has not lost signal. So those last days when it was sloppy out, it did not lose its signal. And the reason I went with that one was because the information I found, it said it was the most accurate of the ones that I was looking at in that price range. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and what's nice with Davis is that their network that I'm on, which I'm gonna get out of this. Here, we're gonna go down here. There we go. There she is. This is their own network, so I do not have to worry about the network not being supported because Davis has their own. Yeah. Well, there's a link here that says map, and there you go. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. Let's see here. I might have to get my eyes on to see what I'm doing, but figure, where are we hiding? That looks like Indianapolis, Terre Haute. There's Marshall, Martinville, Caseyville. There we go. We're getting there. There's Effingham right there. And as you can see, there's a lot of them on the network. So I can actually click on any of those and see what's going on there too. I just like it because the system's accurate, even though I use my rain gauge for rainfall because Coco Ross says I have to. There are times that it's within 0.2, 0.02, 0.03. So this will record, say, 0.12, and my Davis might have recorded 0.02, 0.09. They're close. Yes, sir. From what I saw, each company might have their own link to it. So if you get one from La Crosse, if they offer it, and a lot of them did offer, apps for your phone and for your computer, is that they have their own system that they go back and forth. Yes, sir. Right. Right. I've seen the reviews for some of them, and again, that was one of the reasons why I picked what I did. And also, I need to mention that if you're not quite sure, now I called Scientific Equipment, I went through to get mine. I didn't want to mess with anybody else. I wanted somebody that would be able to answer my questions. These companies, and I've even called Davis on certain things, and they're more than happy to answer the question. So if there's a question about what you're looking at, I say call the company or the vendor, and chances are Amazon won't be able to answer it. But Scientific Equipment, when I called them, boom, they were right there. So don't be afraid to call the vendor or the manufacturer to ask your question. Anyone else? Bueller? Okay, well, I appreciate your time on that. I want to switch gears on you. I'm going to go to this. On the voice. My sounding okay because I'm coming off of a sinus cold. And I'll tell you what. There we go. Okay. Coco Ross, commonly called Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. It's an all-volunteer organization that stretches across the United States, encompasses Canada, let's see here, what else? I think they go to American Samoa, and overseas, and including Puerto Rico. And when I first started with Coco Ross back in 2008, they weren't that far yet. But what Coco Ross does, and our main mission, is to record any kind of precipitation and report it usually within a 24-hour period. During the week, Monday through Friday, on Mondays and Fridays, I usually do my report at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I usually get it in by 4:30. My wife, who's not here, she's over next door and lets me sleep in on the weekends. Thank you. I usually make my recording by 8 o'clock. But with Coco Ross, you're usually on a 24-hour timetable. And what you do with them is that once you get into your system and you have a login, if you're part of it, we're going to get me logged in here. Anybody know what my password is besides me? Great. When I report in the morning, this is what I bring up. It's a basic report form that they have, has the date, time, which I can change, and then I can enter the amount right here. Coco Ross, like the National Weather Service, measures with the decimal system. But Coco Ross wants us to, instead of saying, well, almost a half an inch, if I have 0.24 in my rain gauge, guess what I put in the blank? 0.24. If I have 1.35, well, I put in 1.35 and so on and so forth. What's nice is that they allow you to put in remarks. For me, I put in the recording period, whatever it was. That way, if there's any questions, they know what's going on. Snowfall. They want a 24-hour snowfall report. What you do is you take this little jewel called a snow stick, and I wish I could find the site that sells these things because it's great. It's about a half-inch thick piece of aluminum, and it has a ruler on it, and everything's in tenths. And by the way, the National Weather Service and Coco Ross measure everything in tenths. So if somebody tells you, well, with my rain gauge at home, I measured 1 1/4 inches, well, apparently they don't have a National Weather Service rain gauge or a Coco Ross rain gauge, because you would not measure 1 1/4 rain. You're going to either measure 1 2/10 or 1 3/10. One of the two. Unless you measure 1.25, then you got 1 1/4 maybe. So with Coco Ross and the National Weather Service, they use a tenth system. And we're one of those strange groups of people that we actually melt the snowfall to find out how much liquid is in it. I've been doing this since August 2008, and one of my favorite things to talk about is that there's been several times that I've had 3 inches of snow. Now, I know a lot of people say the rule is, well, for every 3 inches of snow, you get 1 inch of water, right? Not always. One year I had 3 inches of snow, and I barely had 0.10 of an inch of rain. Barely. And then I measured it one time with 3 inches of snow, and the stuff was wet and sticky and stuck to everything. I actually came out with 1 inch of water. So all of us have seen that dry snowfall where it seems to be blowing across the highway nice and easy. That's your dry snow, and chances are you're not going to have as much water. Wherever you see it blowing and sticking to everything, chances are you're going to have a lot of water in that. But what Coco Ross also wants is, so if you have snow on the ground and you get another snowfall the next day, they would like to know what your accumulated snowfall is. So I take my rain gauge out there, stick it in the snow, stick something underneath it so the snow doesn't fall out, take it inside, melt it. So that would be my new snowfall. Go back outside, stick it in the accumulated snow, bring it back in and melt it down and find out what I have from that. That way they have new snowfall and accumulated snowfall. And if you've ever watched the weather, it can change from one day to the other on what kind of snow you get. The nice thing about Coco Ross too is in the reporting, how many remember what happened last June, about halfway through the month? When Fayette Avenue was underwater and just about the entire town was? Well, I can tell you that rain started at 5:20 in the morning. By 6:30, Effingham was blowing bubbles in a lot of areas. If I would have been at home and had access to my Coco Ross information, I could have filled out this report right behind it saying, yo, it started at 5:20 in the morning and ended about 10 o'clock. And then I could go back down and it says, any flooding? Ooh, was there ever? and it would be considered major flooding. The nice part about being part of Cocoa Ross too is that you have a chance to do, there we go, a significant weather observation as well. And in that's where they look to find out what the, how much came down and what. That, by the way, that rainfall we had in June, my weather station picked it up, and the rainfall rate was 7.13 inches an hour. Yikes. Lots of water. But again, with Cocoa Ross, they're looking for the information. And with Cocoa Ross, what happens is all the information is turned over to federal, state, local authorities. They don't know who did the recording, but that's information that they can use. Farmers will have access to it. Say up in Shelbyville, Lake Shelbyville gets a lot of rain. They can tell what's coming down by the local stations, which helps going downstream to Carlisle. And they know how much water to expect on the river systems. And it really helps people. And occasionally, it's happened to me, is that I will use my Cocoa Ross information, and I've actually heard it mentioned on the radio. One year on WA&D TV, it was mentioned. We had gotten like about 9 inches of snow one night, and the guy on WA&D says, local National Weather Service observer from Watson said, we got X amount of snowfall. And I go, hey, I know who that is. So we do help a lot of people with the information that we turn over. Again, Cocoa Ross, it's an international volunteer organization. I'm going to go to their new map. And everybody knows that weather system that came through. Well, look at the East Coast, because that's what they got yesterday, was what we got the day before. So you can go across and find out who gets what as far as information. And I'm just going to back up here to a couple days ago and come in on the Effingham area. All that rain that we got the other day went south of us, so you can see what they have. And then actually, if you go up north, you can see what they got from some of the snow. And if you play with the maps enough, it'll kind of surprise you. Back in January, I was up north. I got caught in one of their snowstorms. And when I got home, I checked my Cocoa Ross maps. Up along the Illinois-Wisconsin state line in the northern counties, they had received anywhere from 6 to 7.5 inches of snow while I was up there. And it was just interesting to see what stations did or who did or didn't melt it down. So as you can see, though, from that, it's a large organization. Again, it's all volunteer, and they're looking for more observers. And we are looking hard for observers in Fayette County. We had one for a while. They kind of faded in and out, and they seem to be there. But right now, Effingham County, we have 6 active Cocoa Ross stations. What else can you do? Well, Cocoa Ross, you can check your data. And you can see there's a lot of ways to go. And I'm just going to pull up Effingham County for you. Here, we're going to back up. Oh. Where's Effingham County? Oh, we'll do it this. Do it that way. Yeah, we'll do it this. I want to bring mine up. Just to kind of show you what's been going on. I picked November 17th, don't ask why. Since November 17th, I've recorded 8.38 inches of precipitation. And again, the National Weather Service records this information. Regional Climate Center does. All the climate centers record it. So that information is there. And how many of you are tied into farming or know somebody that does farming? This is how they help determine what's going on in the way of a drought, if any. We are helping people by doing this. And then also for yourself, if you're involved enough, well, you can do like I did. And you can become what they call a 100%er, which means for me, and I'm not bragging on myself, but it's kind of fun seeing that, I was able to record all 365 days between October 2021 and September 2022 without any errors. And some people do make errors. They might overlap reports or have an decimal point off or something like that and not want to fix it. But that's one of the ways that CoCoRaHS kind of recognizes their observers, but also, this is my weather report summary for last year. And the 30-year average for Effingham County, or at least my location, is 4398. I recorded a total precipitation of 53.02, nailed all 365 days. Daily precipitation summary, I recorded 44.48, and I had 335 daily reports. So every day I went to my computer and punched it in, and it only takes a couple minutes to do it. So you're not spending a whole lot of time doing this, but you are gathering the information that they're looking for. And like I said, it's actually a hobby more than anything else. Yes, sir. For the weather stations, it kind of depends on the range. I know the Davis that I have, they said I could have it as far as 100 feet. But for CoCoRaHS, what they want is at least 25 feet from the back of a house or a tree or whatever, so that doesn't affect that. And these are two separate ideas, by the way. So CoCoRaHS, the reason they want it far enough away is so the tree doesn't affect how much it catches, because we all know trees catch moisture, hold on to it, get a good wind, and it might shake extra into your rain gauge. And that's why they want it at least 25 feet away. If you get it too close to the back of the house, you have wind blocking things. Is that all right? So this takes, this part of CoCoRaHS. I am the county coordinator, and I had gentlemen pass out some of the flyers for CoCoRaHS. So if you're interested in more information, you can get a hold of me, and I'll be happy to do it. The other snow stick I have is kind of flimsy, but there is a website on the CoCoRaHS, link to the CoCoRaHS website, that's called Weather Your Way. And they have a snow stick that's about twice as heavy as this. And instead of being marked going up and down, like this, theirs actually follows the same way as my snow stick. So the scale starts 0 at the bottom and works its way up. And again, it is intense. Just to answer a real quick question, how do we measure snowfall? Well, again, I have a snowboard at the house that's solid, and I know where it's at. So when this hits it, I can hear it. And that way it's not sinking into the grass. We get more of a true measurement. And then, well, what do? I take my outer rain gauge here, plop it in the middle of my snow, and I take this little snow swatter, that's what they call it, and I slide it underneath the gauge, get it turned over, and then take it inside and melt it down. And I do the same thing with the accumulator. One gentleman I was talking to in the previous one, he had one of these break because he got too much whatever in it, and froze it and cracked it. During the winter months, they have us take our tube out so it doesn't crack. But when it's all together, during the summer and the spring, there's actually a little slit in the back or slot, and that sits inside there. The cone goes over it, and the outside cylinder acts as an overflow. So realistically, this will hold about 11 inches of rain. So you don't have to run outside, oh no, it's almost an inch, I gotta go out there and empty it. No, you can wait for a while. And the most I've ever had in that was back, I believe, in 2010, or somewhere in there, when Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Ike went ripping through Illinois. That was the wettest period that I've ever recorded, because that month I had over 10 inches of rain. That's a lot of water. And like I said again, it's fun. And Coco Ross, like I said, one of those crazy people who goes down the snowfall to find out how much water's in it. It's not very time consuming. You can get elaborate, you can go slow, or you can be somebody like me. This is this year, by the way. January, I have to get it caught up. But you can record traces. And by the way, anybody got an idea of how much a trace of rain is? Anything below 0.01. And total rainfall, you can see what I've done with my graph, just to kind of get an idea. We've had some pretty wet years. And like I said, it just kind of depends. If you become a Coco Ross member, you can actually download the spreadsheet, and it's very basic. They have forms for you to download, so you can record it on paper as well as online. And I have all the years that I've done this in paper. Why? Because if something happens to my computer, at least I can kind of reload it. Any questions? Oh. Good question, right? How much does all this cost? If you get the snow stick and the rain gauge, you have to have a Coco Ross rain gauge. You must have one. The Coco Ross rain gauge comes in at about $35. The snow stick, if you get one, I think they're $25. And the snowboard, they're pretty inexpensive. And so you're looking at a couple dollars for a startup, but once you get one, my first rain gauge and that lasted all the way till about 2 years ago. And then I finally got a replacement for the inside cylinder and the cone and the outside. I bought them separately because I needed them at different times. But now I have 2 outside cylinders, which is really handy, so while I'm using one, the other one's still out there collecting whatever. Okay? Any questions? Off goal 1. On twice. Sold Americans. Thank you.